Hey guys! Tonight we're going way, way back. So settle in, dim the lights, maybe wrap yourself in a blanket that's slightly too warm. Because we're drifting into the quiet ruins of the world's lost cities. The places humans built with all their ambition, and then quietly abandoned, like forgetting a pot on the stove for a few millennia. We're starting with one of my favorites. A city so old that calling it ancient feels rude. A city that was forgotten so thoroughly that even its own descendants didn't remember it existed. Welcome to Mohenjo Daro. Which, by the way, literally translates to Mound of the Dead. Very cozy. Very bedtime. So let's glide into this forgotten metropolis. The chillest megacity you never heard about. Mohenjo Daro wasn't supposed to be special. It wasn't supposed to become the centerpiece of the Indus Valley Civilization, one of the oldest urban cultures on Earth. But of course it did. Because humans back then already liked building cities in river floodplains that would definitely cause them problems later. Some habits never change. Picture the scene. It's around 2500 BCE. Stone Age is becoming Bronze Age. People are figuring out metal, pottery, bathrooms. Meanwhile, Europe is still out there trying to remember how to farm. And in the Indus River Basin, someone says, "Hey, what if we build a city with actual city planning?" And everyone else shrugs and says, "Sure." So they build Mohenjo Daro. A city laid out on a grid. Straight roads, structured neighborhoods, organized blocks. Basically urban design thousands of years before it became cool. It has all the features that modern cities brag about. Running water. Sewage systems. Public baths. Standardized bricks. Take notes, medieval Europe. And no obvious royal palace, which is wild. Because most ancient cities had kings lounging in the biggest building like overgrown cats. But here, nothing obvious. No fancy throne rooms. No gold-hoarding pyramid dads. Just a well-planned city that quietly worked. It almost feels too calm. The Great Bath. Because even prehistoric people wanted spa day. One of the city's most iconic structures is the Great Bath. Imagine a massive rectangular pool made of waterproofed brick, probably with steps where people sat, gossiping about who's going to escape this week. Historians debate what it was used for. Maybe ritual purification. Maybe community bonding. Maybe the world's oldest public swimming pool. Whatever the purpose, it shows one thing clearly. These people cared deeply about hygiene. Like obsessively. Bathrooms and drains were everywhere. Private homes had their own bathing areas. Some drains were more advanced than the ones in modern apartments, where the water pressure still gives up halfway through a shower. This was a civilization that genuinely said, "Yes, let's engineer an entire city around cleanliness." Honestly, good for them. The mysterious culture that wrote things no one can read. Here's the fun part. The Indus Valley people left writing. But we can't read any of it. Not a word. For over a century, linguists have stared at these cute little seals covered in tiny symbols. And the symbols have stared back with the confidence of a cat refusing to make eye contact. There are animals, little geometric shapes, and short inscriptions everywhere. It looks sophisticated. Probably records important things like trade, ownership, maybe religious ideas. But since we can't read it, we're left guessing. Might be a language. Might be accounting. Might be someone doodling. Might be receipts for grain. Might be passive-aggressive notes like, "Stop putting your cow in front of my door." We will simply never know until someone cracks the code. And at this point, the writing system seems to be looking down at us like, "No, you had 4,000 years. Figure it out." A city built on brick. Like so many bricks. Let's talk bricks. Because Mohenjo Daro had an obsession. All the buildings used standardized bricks. Same size, same shape, same firing method. It's as if the entire civilization had a national brick aesthetic that nobody was allowed to break. You know how modern HOAs complain about the color of someone's mailbox? The Indus Valley version would be, "Your bricks are 2 millimeters off. Fix it." The uniformity means something important. This was a civilization with rules, standardization, and what appears to be a suspiciously functional government. Which raises the question, where is the government? No palaces. No giant temples. No royal tombs filled with glittering loot. Nothing that screams, "Yes, bow before me. I am the supreme potato king." Instead we get normal buildings, workshops, houses, big public bath, storage areas. It's like the entire city ran on deeply chill bureaucratic cooperation, which is honestly terrifying. Humans are not good at quiet cooperation. The forgotten people of the Indus Valley. Mohenjo Daro wasn't alone. There were dozens of cities in this civilization. Harappa, Kalibangan, Dhalavira, all following similar layouts and construction methods. They traded with Mesopotamia. They made jewelry. They had weights and measures more standardized than some modern countries' traffic laws. But here's what's interesting. They disappeared without clear evidence of war. No burnt layers. No huge cemeteries from plague. No dramatic messages like, "This is why we can't have nice things." Just decline. It's like they gradually got tired of city life and wandered off. Theories for the Great Vanishing. None of them dramatic. Archaeologists have argued for decades about why the Indus Valley Civilization fell apart. Every theory is basically a slow, boring explanation, perfect for bedtime. Environmental change. Rivers shifted. The monsoon pattern changed. The region got drier. People moved to places where farming was easier. Extremely relatable. Over-farming. They used land for too long. Crops got weaker. Yields dropped. People shrugged and left. Trade decline. Their Mesopotamian trade partners got busy with their own wars and problems. The Indus cities lost income. Urban life became unsustainable. Gradual abandonment. The least dramatic explanation of all. Everything just slowly fizzled out. The truth is probably a mix. A gentle fade into history. A city slowly becoming quieter until one day, no one lived there anymore. If you walked through the streets of Mohenjo Daro at the very end, you wouldn't see flames or chaos. You'd probably just see dust gathering in empty doorways. Peaceful in a melancholy way. Perfectly sleepy, honestly. The rediscovery. Oh right, this existed. Fast forward to the 1920s. Archaeologists in British India stumble across a set of mounds near the Indus River. They dig a little, as archaeologists do. They find bricks. More bricks. More bricks. And then they realize, oh, this is a city. Huge one. Suddenly, the narrative of world history had to be rewritten. Because until then, ancient history was basically Egypt, Mesopotamia, and nothing else apparently. Then Mohenjo Daro popped up like, hey guys, we were actually building drains before you even invented pyramids. It was embarrassing for archaeologists but delightful for everyone else. Daily life in the city. Let's glide into the quieter corners of Mohenjo Daro. The daily life stuff. The kind of details that make history feel like a lived place instead of a dusty textbook. Houses. Homes were small but well designed. 2 floors sometimes. Courtyards. Bathrooms. They used the roofs for sleeping in hot weather like ancient air conditioning. Some houses had private wells, like having your own filtered water system in 2500 BCE. Very fancy. Markets. There were shops everywhere. You could buy beads, pottery, metals, grains, and maybe even street food. Probably lentils. So many lentils. Occupations. The city was full of metal workers, potters, traders, scribes probably, brickmakers definitely, and someone whose entire job was cleaning drains. Truly the hero of the city. Religion. It's unclear. We have little statues. Some look like fertility figures, some look like animals. There's the famous priest-king statue, which may not actually be a king or a priest. Could be some guy who posed for the world's earliest passport photo. The truth is, we just don't know. The Indus people kept their secrets extremely well. The layout. A city too organized to be accidental. The whole place was divided into 2 main areas. The citadel, public buildings. The lower town, residential neighborhoods. Everything made sense. Everything was functional. Everything showed planning. Honestly, Mohenjo Daro feels like a group project where everyone actually did their part. Suspicious. Even the drainage system ran along the streets, covered in removable bricks so someone could clean it. This was 4,500 years ago. Meanwhile, in some modern cities, one rainstorm still causes biblical flooding. Mohenjo Daro is just looking at them like, embarrassing. People, what did they look like? We have skeletons. We have art. We have statues. So we know a few things. They were diverse. Lots of different facial features. Probably people from many regions living together. A cosmopolitan population long before the word existed. Their clothing was simple, mostly wrapped cloth. Their jewelry, on the other hand, was excellent. Beads, bangles, necklaces. People in the Indus Valley loved accessorizing. They probably rolled their eyes at anyone not wearing enough bling. The big misconceptions. There's a popular myth that the city was destroyed suddenly, maybe by invaders. No. There's no clear evidence of war. No burn layers. No fortifications. Nothing dramatic. In fact, the city was flooded multiple times. The Indus River loved causing problems, but each time people moved back and rebuilt. They were resilient until environmental shifts made life too difficult. The collapse wasn't a bang, just a long sigh. Mohenjo Daro today. A city dissolving in slow motion. Here's the sad part. The ruins are fragile. The bricks, once baked in ancient kilns, are slowly melting under modern saltwater intrusion, humidity, and weathering. It's ironic. The city survived 4,500 years only to be threatened by climate and human activity in the last 100. But standing there today, among the quiet mounds, you can feel the shape of the old city. The long streets, the wells, a bath, the silence. It's almost peaceful. A place where the noise of modern life feels very far away. Perfect for drifting to sleep. Let's float to the next lost city. Now that we've wandered through the silent streets of Mohenjo Daro, let's gently drift toward a different kind of lost city. One that vanished not through slow decline, but in a single quiet moment, despite what Hollywood likes to claim. Part 2: Pompeii, the city that froze itself in time. Almost equals 1,700 words. I will continue with Part 3 when you say, continue again. Hey guys, welcome back. Now that we've wandered through the quiet, dust-softened streets of Mohenjo Daro, we're drifting forward in time. About 2,500 years forward, actually. Straight into a different kind of silence. Sudden one. A silence pressed into ash. Tonight we're floating into Pompeii, the Roman city that didn't plan to become a museum, but well, sometimes history decides things for you. So tuck in again. Get comfortable. We're taking a slow walk through a place that lived fast and died quietly, despite what every dramatic documentary tries to show you. Let's settle into the ash-covered calm of Pompeii. The city that wasn't supposed to be special, but ended up famous anyway. Pompeii wasn't Rome. It wasn't even that important in the grand imperial scheme. It was more of a cozy Roman vacation town, the ancient equivalent of a tourist beach city where rich people went to relax and pretend they didn't have responsibilities. Pompeii had good wine, good weather, and good villas. A nice coastal breeze. Fancy mosaics. Warm bath. It was basically the treat-yourself destination of the Roman elite. And then one day, it became the world's most famous cautionary tale about living too close to volcanoes. Because humans love building cities in scenic but deeply questionable locations. A tradition that clearly spans thousands of years. Before the ash. A city full of color and noise. We tend to imagine ancient ruins as gray and quiet. But Pompeii before its final day was neither. The walls were painted red, blue, gold. Frescoes everywhere. Columns decorated with mythical creatures. Mosaics on floors so intricate that modern tile setters would cry. Markets buzzed with chatter. Wine shops spilled laughter into the street. Street food vendors sold bread and cheese and olives. Bakery ovens burned day and night. 30 bakeries, in fact, Because Romans absolutely loved carbs. People lounged in bathhouses, visited temples, checked out local gossip, complained about taxes, and scribbled graffiti complaining that someone named Marcus still owed them money. Yes, ancient graffiti survives. And it's absolutely relatable. One classic reads, "I was here." Another, "Successus was here, drunk." Turns out people have always had the same energy. The volcano everyone pretended was a mountain. Mount Vesuvius loomed over the city. A big, impressive, scenic mountain. Except, it wasn't actually a mountain. It was a volcano. An active one. Some people knew. Most didn't. The Romans didn't exactly have geology textbooks. Pliny the Elder, a Roman author who will become relevant later, once described a mountain that breathes fire. But nobody connected that to Vesuvius. Because why would a volcano sit there quietly for centuries? That silence probably made everyone a little too comfortable. The day everything stopped. August 24th, 79 CE. Hot, quiet day. People went about their business. Shops opened. Kids played. Bread baked in ovens. And then Vesuvius said, "You know what? Today." But here's the thing. Pompeii's destruction wasn't dramatic in the Hollywood sense. There were no giant fireballs chasing people down the street. There was no running in slow motion. It wasn't an action movie. It was more like a sudden shower of pumice stones. A slow buildup of ash. Roofs collapsing. Then a wave of heat that ended everything almost instantly. The city didn't burn. Didn't explode. Just stopped. The ash settled. And Pompeii went to sleep for 1,700 years. The people, preserved by accident, not by flames. People talk a lot about the plaster casts of Pompeii, the frozen shapes of people in their final moments. But here's the ironically calm truth. The actual bodies are long gone. Plaster was later poured into the hollow spaces left in the ash where bodies once were. That's what creates the casts. They are shadows of the past, not actual people. And though it sounds dramatic, the final moments captured in ash are very still, very quiet. A snapshot of a moment no one expected to preserve. Some people curled as if sleeping. Some hid their faces. Some held their loved ones. There's a simple hush to it. A stillness that feels strangely peaceful. Pompeii's architecture. A city that kept all its receipts. Let's drift through the buildings. Forum. Political center. Columns, statues, government offices. A big open space where people argued about everything from grain prices to public scandal. Very Roman energy. The amphitheater. Still there. Extremely well preserved. It's the oldest known stone amphitheater in the Roman world. It seated about 20,000 people, which is impressive until you remember the entire city only had about 12,000 residents. So either they invited neighbors or attendance was optional. The villas. Take the House of the Faun. A massive estate. 4 dining rooms. Private gardens. Mosaics so detailed you could easily mistake them for pixel art. The kind of house that says, Yes, I am wealthy, and yes, I want everyone to know. The shops and bakeries, bars and food stalls lined the streets. Not glamorous but lively. Romans absolutely love street food. If they had pizza, Italy would have become unstoppable centuries earlier. The bath. Quiet, relaxing, steamy. A whole social world built around public bathing. People discussed politics. Gossip. Probably argued about who cheated in dice games. The water system Romans were unreasonably proud of. Pompeii had a surprisingly advanced water supply. Aqueducts fed fountains all over the city. Every neighborhood had at least one. People filled jugs, washed hands, splashed dogs, refreshed themselves on hot days. The fountains are still there. Now they sit in silence, dry, like empty birdbaths for ghosts. The streets, built for chaos and charm. Roman streets were not smooth. They were uneven stone blocks. Deep ruts from carts. High stepping stones for crossing when the streets were full of water or waste. Imagine walking around in sandals while dodging puddles. Ancient life had its challenges. But the layout was clever. Straight roads. Grid-like organization. Shops facing the busiest spots. Pompeii wasn't just a city. It was a well-designed experience. The art. Colorful, strange, and very proud of itself. Pompeii's art is one of the most surprising things about the city. Because it didn't fade with time. It was preserved. We still have a mythological murals, portraits, still life fruit bowls, birds, gardens, and yes, a lot of adult-themed frescoes, because Romans had the subtlety of modern meme culture. There are signs with paintings of loaves of bread, advertisements for taverns, and walls full of decorative patterns that look like ancient wallpaper. In many houses, the walls were painted bright red, the famous Pompeian red. It was the stylish color of the time. A statement wall. An Instagram backdrop, 79 CE edition. Daily life. Caught in the middle of doing nothing special. One of the strangest things about Pompeii is how ordinary everything feels. Archaeologists found loaves of bread still in ovens, pots still on stoves, tables set for dinner, tools laid out, lamps in corners, coins on counters, pet dog chains, half-written graffiti, wine jars sealed with wax, parchments mid-sentence, a laundry in washing basins. It's like someone hit pause on a city that never got to unpause. Makes Pompeii feel familiar, like a place where you could walk in and instantly understand the rhythm of life. The rediscovery. Archaeology's most chaotic moment. Pompeii was rediscovered in the 1700s by people who didn't really understand archaeology. Their idea of excavation was, dig up cool stuff and take it home. Entire frescoes were peeled off walls. Treasure hunters dug tunnels. Artifacts disappeared into private collections. It was messy, but eventually proper archaeologists took over. And then Pompeii became a goldmine for understanding Roman life. Suddenly historians could see how houses were arranged, what people ate, what they wore, what they worshipped, how shops worked, how many dogs lived in the city, and how many people named Marcus owed each other money. Pompeii went from forgotten ruin to the ultimate historical time capsule. The quiet spaces, rooms that remember nothing and everything. There are rooms in Pompeii that feel frozen in a way that's almost meditative. Bedrooms with simple beds. Kitchen spaces with soot still clinging to the walls. Garden courtyards now filled with silence instead of vines. And it's strange because despite the city's dramatic end, the ruins feel calm. Not haunted or frightening. Just quiet. Like a place that knows it has told its story enough times and doesn't need to say more. The final irony. The city wasn't destroyed at all. People say Pompeii was destroyed. But the ash preserved it. Protected it. Saved it from weather, looting, and decay. What ended its life also kept it intact. A city frozen in its most ordinary moment. There's something peaceful about that. A stillness that settles over the ruins even today. When you walk through Pompeii now, or when you imagine it, you feel like you're intruding on a city that isn't gone. Just waiting. Let's drift toward the next lost city. Now that we've wandered through Pompeii's ash-covered streets and quiet rooms, it's time to drift again. Forward through time. Across continents. Into a jungle swallowing something much larger, much grander, and much stranger. Part 3, Angkor Wat, the temple that got lost on purpose. Almost equals 1,700 words. I'll begin part 4 when you say, continue. Hey guys. Welcome back again. If you're still awake after strolling through Pompeii's ash-covered calm, then congratulations. You're officially stronger than most people who try listening to history at bedtime. Now we're drifting somewhere very different. A place that didn't fall because of a volcano, or an invasion, or even a dramatic natural disaster. Angkor just sort of wandered off. Slowly. Quietly. Like someone who stands up halfway through a conversation and says, "All right, I'm gonna head out," and then never returns. Tonight, we're floating into Angkor Wat, the monumental temple complex that decided the jungle would make a nicer roommate than humanity. So dim the lights again. Settle into your pillow. And let's pass through the tree roots and ancient stones of Cambodia's most famous ghost city. Before it was lost. A capital so big it forgot to stop growing. Angkor wasn't a city. Angkor was an entire civilization spread across the Cambodian plains. Thousands of temples, reservoirs, palaces, neighborhoods. A landscape carved with the confidence of rulers who never heard the words budget constraints. At its height, Angkor covered an area about the size of modern Los Angeles. Which is a fun comparison because Angkor didn't have traffic jams or billboards. Just calm water reservoirs and temples built like giant stone puzzles. The Khmer kings didn't think small. They didn't even think reasonable. They thought, how about we turn the entire country into a giant architectural flex? And they did. Angkor Wat, the centerpiece that wasn't supposed to be a tourist attraction. Angkor Wat is the star today. But originally it wasn't meant to be a dramatic ruin covered in vines. It was built in the 12th century by King Suryavarman II, a man whose name translates to something like the sun-protected one, which is honestly a pretty great branding choice. His project was simple. Build a temple for the god Vishnu. A temple that would outshine every other temple. A temple that could be seen from, well, pretty much everywhere. The result was Angkor Wat. 5 towering lotus-shaped spires, endless corridors, and walls covered in bas-relief carvings so detailed that modern tour guides still pretend to understand all of them. But in the 1100s, this wasn't a ruin. It was pristine, shiny, decorated, overflowing with priests, dancers, guards, scribes, and probably the ancient equivalent of people who hang around waiting for a royal paycheck. It was lively, it was loud, and it was the center of a world that felt like it would last forever. Of course, it didn't. A city powered by water, the Khmer Empire's favorite hobby. The people of Angkor had one major obsession: water. Reservoirs. Canals. More reservoirs. More canals. More moats. If something could be surrounded by water, they surrounded it. Angkor Wat itself sits inside a moat so enormous it looks like a lake made by a civilization that didn't do things by halves. If modern urban planners had this level of commitment, every shopping mall would have a moat. And honestly, daily life would be much more interesting. But the Khmer weren't doing this for aesthetics. The water system irrigated huge agricultural fields, cooled the city. It showed off the king's power. And it worked. Until it didn't. Because water systems are like pets. You have to maintain them. And when you don't, nature sends you a very polite message in the form of wild vegetation reclaiming every canal you've ever built. The kings, dramatic, ambitious, and constantly building something. Khmer kings loved projects. And by projects, I mean buildings large enough to make their advisors quietly consider early retirement. Every king wanted his own temple. Every king wanted his own capital. Every king wanted to leave a mark on history the size of a small mountain. So they kept building, and rebuilding, and re-rebuilding, like ancient kings who couldn't stop refreshing their home decor. One king, Jayavarman VII, essentially turned the empire into a construction site on maximum difficulty. He built hospitals, temples, giant faces carved into towers, roads, bridges, the works. Imagine being a citizen trying to take a nap during that era. Not a chance. Daily life, calm, green, and surprisingly ordinary. It's easy to imagine Angkor as some mystical stone kingdom. But daily life, pretty normal. People farmed rice. They wove cloth. They fished in the reservoirs. Kids ran around barefoot. Monks chanted in the temples. Courtiers worried about pleasing the king. Elephants wandered around because in ancient Southeast Asia, that was just part of the scenery. Most homes were wood, not stone, so they didn't survive. Which is why Angkor looks like it was populated exclusively by temples and nothing else. In reality, the city was full of life. It just left behind the durable bits. The slow fading. Not a collapse, just a gradual, "You guys good? I'm leaving." Angkor didn't have one big disaster. It had several decades of death by tiny inconveniences. Water systems clogged. Infrastructure cracked. Climate changed. Wars came and went. Kings shifted capitals. The jungle got bolder. And the population slowly thinned. Eventually, the place wasn't so much abandoned as it was forgotten about. Like a giant cosmic, "I'll clean this up later" that never happened. The jungle moved in. Trees sprouted between stones. Roots squeezed walls like they were giving very slow, very aggressive hugs. Birds took over courtyards. Mosquitoes claimed everything else. Angkor Wat never vanished completely. Monks still lived there, but the city around it faded into the green quiet. The rediscovery. A European walks in and says, "Wow!" In the 19th century, French explorers stumbled across Angkor Wat and thought, that's not supposed to be here." Locals already knew it existed, of course. It wasn't lost to them. But Europeans reacted as they usually did when encountering ancient architecture, with dramatic enthusiasm and immediate plans for restoration. When they saw the tree roots winding over the stone towers, they didn't understand the patience it took for nature to do that. Hundreds of years of quiet, slow movement. Inches per year. Little by little. Like the world's most relaxed terraforming project. The stone faces. Calm smiles that know more than they're saying. One of Angkor's most iconic features is the giant faces carved into the temple towers of Bayon. Dozens of serene expressions staring into the jungle from every angle. People debate who they're supposed to be. A king. A god. Someone with a very strong jawline. Whoever they represent, the expression is unmistakable. A calm, closed-mouth smile. The kind that says, "Yes, I know all your secrets, but I'm too polite to mention them." These faces survived centuries of rain, heat, humidity, and roots. They still look peaceful. Like ancient stone meditators who reached nirvana while waiting for humans to stop making noise. The carvings. Walls that act like very patient storytellers. Angkor's walls are covered in bas-reliefs. Scenes of battles. Processions. Women in elaborate costumes dancing with impossible grace. Whole armies marching in neat rows. Crocodiles, monkeys, kings, gods, demons. You name it, someone carved it. What's charming is how many of these scenes include very normal, mundane moments. People cooking. People carrying baskets. People gossiping. A guy holding a chicken. It's like the artists understood that if you're going to carve a massive temple wall, you might as well include the everyday stuff too. Nature, the slow architect that took over the lease. Angkor's real guardian isn't a king. It's the jungle. Trees grew into walls. Roots slithered around halls like slow-moving serpents. Leaves softened every broken edge. The heat wrapped everything in a warm haze. Rain washed the stones until they glowed. Especially at Ta Prohm, the famous temple where trees spill over the ruins like they're posing for a very dramatic nature photoshoot. This wasn't destruction. Nature didn't attack. Simply filled the space humans left behind. Very politely. Very patiently. In its own quiet schedule. Modern Angkor. Protected, revered, and occasionally photobombed by tourists. Today, Angkor is one of the most visited historical sites in the world. But early in the morning before the crowds arrive, it still holds onto that old quiet. The moat around Angkor Wat reflects the towers like a still mirror. Monks walk barefoot in saffron robes. The jungle hums softly, and the stones sit exactly where they've been sitting for centuries. Let's not pretend the tourists don't break the mood sometimes. Selfie sticks happen. People trip on steps built for feet much smaller than ours. Someone inevitably says, "Dude, I saw this in Tomb Raider." But when the air settles and the sun sinks behind the spires, Angkor feels exactly as it always has. Calm, ancient, and oddly comforting. The quiet ending. A city that went back to the earth. Angkor's story isn't tragic. It isn't violent. It isn't dramatic. It's more like a gentle retreat. A city that worked, thrived, flourished, and then sighed softly and let itself be reclaimed. Not broken. Not destroyed. Just quiet again. There's a peacefulness in that. A sense that not every lost city needs an explosive ending. Some simply return to the earth that raised them. Let's float back into the forests of Cambodia, where our beloved overachieving kings just kept making life harder for themselves by building monuments so large that even the jungle eventually said, "Okay, I'm taking this back now." So where were we? Right. The moment when Angkor Wat stopped being just a temple and started being a full-on lifestyle choice for the Khmer Empire. Suryavarman II's everything everywhere all at once ambitions. Suryavarman II, the guy behind Angkor Wat, had what we could politely call a strong sense of personal branding. He didn't just want a nice temple. He didn't even want the biggest temple. He wanted a cosmic palace with himself basically written into the architectural code. And he achieved it by commissioning a project so enormous that future kings later stared at it and quietly muttered, "Yeah, I'm not topping that." Everything here, every carving, every sandstone block, every perfectly aligned tower, was meant to reflect the Hindu universe. But in a way that said, "Yes, but make it deluxe." The central tower, Mount Meru, the surrounding towers, smaller versions of Mount Meru, the moat around the whole complex, the cosmic ocean naturally, because if you're going to create a spiritual model of the entire universe, you might as well fill it with water and hope nobody asks questions about the maintenance schedule. And honestly, no one ever built confidence quite like ancient kings. They looked at the literal heavens and said, "I could recreate that." A temple built by people who must have had very sore arms. Something people forget about Angkor Wat is that it wasn't built with cranes or pulleys or hydraulic magic. It was built with humans. Lots of them. Probably more than we can comfortably imagine. Workers carved miles, yes miles, of bas-reliefs. Scenes of epic battles. Divine sagas. Heavenly dancers who somehow all look like they've been awake for 3 days straight but are still trying to smile through it. Each stone was quarried from far away, floated down rivers, dragged through forests, shaped by hand, and then fitted with the kind of precision that modern contractors would charge you triple for. It wasn't just labor. It was devotion disguised as muscle fatigue. And the irony is, most people who visit Angkor Wat today walk right past these carvings while thinking mostly about how hot it is and how their water bottle is suddenly empty again. But then, the jungle started auditioning for a main role. After Suryavarman II died, and in classic Southeast Asian royal fashion, probably not under peaceful circumstances, Angkor Wat continued as a respected monument. But over the next centuries, the Khmer Empire began experiencing, let's call them compounding issues. The usual kingdom problems. Flooding, drought, some poorly timed wars. A throne succession situation that resembled a long-running family argument with occasional stabbing. As the capital shifted and power moved around, Angkor Wat gradually stopped being the center of royal life. And here's where nature entered the story like a quiet, overconfident intruder. The forests surrounding Angkor Thom and the wider Angkor complex began creeping inward. Trees sprouted in courtyards. Vines slid along stone walls. Roots pushed between blocks like they were politely but firmly asking the architecture to move aside. Angkor Wat itself never vanished completely. Monks continued using the temple, which saved it. But its surrounding city, the enormous metropolis of Angkor, slowly dissolved under green waves of vegetation. It didn't collapse with fire and screaming. It faded with humidity and roots. A very calm apocalypse, really. The Europeans arrive and dramatically announce discovery. Fast forward to the 19th century, when Europeans began exploring Southeast Asia with the sort of energy that only comes from having no idea what's going on. When they reached Angkor, they reacted pretty much how you'd expect. They looked at an active religious site and said, "Wow, a lost city. We have discovered it." Meanwhile, the local people were like, "Bestie, it's literally right there. It wasn't lost. You were just late." But of course, nothing could stop the European reputation machine. Poets, explorers, scholars, all started writing dreamy travel accounts describing a forgotten kingdom swallowed by the forest. They sounded very romantic, very mysterious, very Victorian adventure core. And yes, Angkor was overgrown. Yes, huge sections were abandoned. But the lost city part was mostly a Western fantasy layered on top of a Cambodian reality. Still, I'll give them this. Their diaries did help spark global interest in preserving the ruins. Even if they exaggerated the "nobody knew this existed until we arrived" storyline just a little. Well, a lot. Let's gently glide to the fun part. The hydraulic overachievers. One of the most fascinating things about Angkor, something that is still blowing archaeologists' minds, is the enormous, very sophisticated water management network. The Khmer engineers built giant reservoirs called barays. We're talking enormous artificial lakes so big that even today, satellite images struggle to capture the full scale. Then there were canals, tunnels, basins. Literally an entire watery skeleton beneath the city. It was all designed to control floods, store water for droughts, and irrigate farmlands so efficiently that Angkor could support an estimated population of 700,000 to 1 million people. A lot of rice. and a lot of people who presumably complained about the humidity at least twice a day. This system was stunning when it worked. But when the climate shifted and the monsoons grew unpredictable, the very thing that made Angkor thrive began stressing the entire civilization. Sometimes you build a brilliant technological solution, and the weather just laughs at you. Jayavarman VII, the king who just kept building stuff. Now we drift into the reign of Jayavarman VII, who remains one of the most intense, fascinating kings in Southeast Asian history. If Suryavarman II built Angkor Wat, Jayavarman VII built literally everything else. Temples. He built them. Monasteries. Absolutely. Hospitals. Dozens. Road networks. He upgraded them. A brand new capital city, Angkor Thom, complete with a Bayon temple full of those giant serene stone faces. Yes, too. He basically treated Cambodia like his personal SimCity save file. But all this construction came with a cost. The empire's resources stretched thin. The population exhausted. And while Jayavarman VII was trying to heal the empire after a damaging war, he also maybe pushed everyone a little too hard. Think of him as that one manager who is incredibly inspiring but also quietly causing burnout across the entire team. When Angkor faded, slowly and softly, over the next centuries, shifts in trade, religion, climate, and politics gradually pulled life away from Angkor. It wasn't a dramatic fall. No big final battle. No flaming collapse. It was a slow exhale. By the 1400s, the royal court had moved southward. Angkor was still visited. Still respected, still deeply spiritual, but it no longer beat with the energy of a living city. Instead, it became something quieter, something resting, something waiting, until the modern world arrived to admire its sleeping beauty. So, where were we? Right. Angkor slowly transitioning from a bustling megacity into something more like a beautifully aging monument that the jungle politely reclaimed, vine by vine. Let's wander a bit more. The incredible, mildly overwhelming scale of the city. One thing to keep in mind is that Angkor wasn't just a big ancient city. It was the biggest city on Earth for several centuries. Larger than medieval London. Larger than Paris. Larger than anything Europe could produce while still figuring out how to not set its own buildings on fire. Angkor sprawled across hundreds of square kilometers. Temples, suburbs, farmland, reservoirs, royal compounds, and ordinary homes. An entire civilization woven together through water channels and causeways. But because so many houses were built from wood, bamboo, and thatch, materials that return to nature faster than your New Year's resolutions, the stone temples became the only visible skeleton of a much larger living world. It's like looking at a person's jewelry and trying to guess their entire wardrobe. Still, what remains today is enough to make anyone stand quietly for a moment. And Angkor Wat, sitting at the heart of all this, was the crown jewel. Quiet. Symmetrical. So big that walking around it feels like drifting through a dream where distances stretch just slightly beyond comfortable logic. The temple that refused to die. One of the reasons Angkor Wat survived when so many structures around it faded away is surprisingly simple. monks never left. While other temples became overgrown, Angkor Wat stayed spiritually active, maintained, cleaned, respected. Even when the region became largely Buddhist, they didn't abandon it. They just adapted it. Suryavarman too probably would have grumbled about this. He built the place for Hindu divinities after all, but history rarely consults the original architect. The monks weren't preserving the temple as a museum. They were living in it, praying, caring for it, keeping it relevant in the rhythm of daily life. And this steady, quiet presence protected the temple from total collapse. It's amazing what you can save just by staying somewhere for 1,000 years. The walls that whisper stories. Very slowly. If you've ever wandered through Angkor Wat, or even if you never will, you can appreciate the bas-reliefs carved into its walls. These carvings stretch over 800 meters. Scenes from the Mahabharata. Scenes from the Ramayana. Scenes of battles that historians debate because everyone carved themselves looking very heroic. But the interesting thing isn't the content. It's the tone. Everything is calm. Almost too calm. Warriors look like they've been told to keep it down because someone's trying to sleep in the next cosmic realm. Even the churning of the ocean of milk, one of the most dramatic scenes in Hindu mythology, looks like a group of very polite supernatural beings participating in some kind of cosmic tug-of-war team-building exercise. It's perfect for a sleepy history vibe. You could stare at those walls for hours and feel your pulse drop to a peaceful vacation setting. A civilization shaped by water, and then undone by it. Let's drift back to Angkor's enormous hydraulic system. It was brilliant. It was complex. It was the reason 1 million people could live in the middle of monsoon-flooded Cambodia. But it was also the reason things became difficult. In years of heavy rain, the network strained. In years of drought, reservoirs dried. Over time, sediment clogged channels. Maintenance became overwhelming. When everything depends on water, everything also depends on perfect, predictable weather, which nature does not offer, ever. And so the system that once elevated the Khmer Empire became a quiet burden. Not a dramatic downfall. Just a gradually increasing list of problems that no one ruler could fully solve. Angkor didn't fall. Faded. Like a candle burning too slowly to notice until it's almost gone. The switch to the south. A kingdom repositions itself. By the 15th century, the Khmer court moved farther south, closer to trade routes, away from the maintenance nightmare of Angkor's waterworks. This wasn't a moment of panic. No, everyone run, the city is collapsing scene. Just a practical shift. Capital moved. Population moved. Angkor Wat remained. And it continued to stand, surrounded by forest, visited by monks, admired by travelers, occasionally sketched by curious outsiders who believed they had stumbled upon some forgotten kingdom. If cities could sigh, Angkor would have let out a long, peaceful breath and said, "Finally, a break." Colonial-era romanticism. The jungle takes the credit. In the 19th century, when French explorers reached Angkor, they fell into immediate poetic delirium. They wrote lyrical descriptions about nature reclaiming the grandeur of man, as if the trees had staged a dramatic coup. In reality, the temple was never fully abandoned. Local people definitely knew about it. The monks were still very much right there. But Europeans couldn't resist a good lost city narrative. It made for better reading and better bragging rights. Still, their interest ultimately brought restoration efforts, mapping, conservation, and archaeological research. Even if we all had to tolerate a bit of colonial fanfiction in the process. Angkor in the modern world, a balancing act. Today, Angkor Wat is many things at once. A World Heritage Site, a national symbol, religious center, tourist magnet, a deeply spiritual place, and, depending on the time of year, a place where your clothes melt off from humidity. Millions of visitors walk its sandstone paths each year, trying to take the perfect sunrise photo while pretending to be deeply moved rather than deeply dehydrated. But amidst all this, the temple remains strangely calm. It has survived kings, wars, jungles, droughts, floods, colonizers, looters, and the stress of modern tourism. If Angkor Wat had a personality, it would probably be that unbothered friend who quietly says, "I'll be here when you're done having your moment." A gentle conclusion to our wander through Angkor. So that brings us to the end of this long, slow drift through the forests, stones, and stories of Angkor. A city that lived vast and bold. A temple that lived long and steady. And a civilization that understood the power of water, stone, and cosmic imagination. There was no dramatic collapse. No final explosion. Just a long, peaceful slide into a different place in history. And honestly, that might be the most soothing ending of all. If you'd like, I can now. Hey again. Let's settle in for the last stretch of tonight's wandering. Maybe dim the lights if you haven't already. Or let your screen brightness fall to that level where everything looks like it's underwater. We've drifted across continents, through dusty Indus streets, ash-covered Roman villas, and the forest-wrapped stones of Angkor. And now, we drift through the quiet space between them. This part isn't about a single city. It's about the way all lost cities feel when you look at them long enough. A soft reminder that time has a very casual, almost comedic attitude about everything humans build. Time doesn't destroy cities, just forgets to check in on them. 3 cities. 3 different breaths of history. One very patient universe. If you think about it, the ruins we admire today weren't really meant to last. Mohenjo Daro was meant to host families, merchants, and sleepy kids who definitely didn't want to go to whatever school system existed in 2000 BCE. Not tourists wearing hats with neck flaps and complaining about bottled water prices. Pompeii wasn't built so that archaeologists could someday count the rooms in Roman houses like they were checking Airbnb floor plans. It was meant to be lived in. Loudly. Messily. In that perfectly chaotic Roman way where someone was always yelling about bread prices. And Angkor Wat? Well, that was built to impress the gods, which is a very ambitious target audience. But even then, the kings who built it didn't imagine millions of future visitors quietly shuffling along its galleries, half listening to audio guides while trying not to sweat too visibly. 3 cities, 3 worlds, 3 endings. And each ending was strangely gentle. Even Pompeii, for all the lava-related drama, now rests in a silence so complete that it almost feels like the volcano is apologizing. Mohenjo Daro, the city that slipped away like a soft exhale. Let's float back just lightly to the Indus Valley. Mohenjo Daro was a masterpiece of planning. Straight streets, symmetrical houses, drainage systems that modern cities should honestly take notes from. And yet, when the river shifted, the city slowly emptied. No disaster, no flames, no grand finale. Just the soft, steady retreat of people looking for better farmland and safer water. Quiet migration, a gentle fading. Today it lies under a hot sun, a grid of baked bricks whispering about the chores, trades, and gossip that used to flow through its streets. It's funny how people always talk about lost cities. But Mohenjo Daro isn't lost. It's right there. It's us who keep forgetting to imagine what living there actually felt like. Pompeii. A city frozen not in death, but in routine. Now let's glide back to Italy. Pompeii was stopped mid-sentence. Not by war. Not by decline. Just by nature having a sudden fit of volcanic enthusiasm at a very inconvenient time. But the real strangeness of Pompeii isn't the tragedy. It's the normality that survived. A loaf of bread still in the oven. Graffiti reminding neighbors that someone owed someone else money. A dog chained at a doorway, mid-guard duty forever. People who were just living. Pompeii isn't a city of death. It's a city of paused life. And when you walk through it, even in photos, you can almost hear the footsteps that never got to finish their day. It's quiet now. Too quiet. But in a strangely peaceful way, like time tucked it into bed and whispered, "Rest." Angkor. A city the jungle didn't want to fight, just embrace. And then there's Angkor. A city so enormous and complicated that you'd expect its fall to be dramatic. But no. Like a tired empire that finally admitted it deserved a break, Angkor simply slowed down. People left. Monks stayed. Trees arrived with their very enthusiastic roots. The jungle didn't swallow the city, just gave it shade. And now Angkor feels like a temple caught halfway between human hands and nature's patience. Standing in Angkor Thom or imagining it, you can sense a kind of slow heartbeat, pulse of stone and air. A reminder that humans once built something grand, and then let it rest. The comforting pattern behind all ruins. When you look at these 3 cities together, something becomes clear. Lost cities aren't really about collapse. They're about transformation. Mohenjo Daro became dust and memory. Pompeii became a time capsule. Angkor became a forest cathedral. But all of them became softer versions of themselves. Gentler, quiet, reflective. Time has a way of smoothing every sharp edge. If anything, ruins help us understand that humans, for all our ambition, eventually hand everything over to weather, plants, and curious archaeologists who keep arguing about pottery shards. A slow walk through the Museum of Time. Imagine all 3 cities displayed in one long, dimly lit hall. On the left, The baked bricks of Mohenjo Daro, arranged in silent grids like the world's tedious Lego project. Ahead, the plaster casts of Pompeii, figures curled in their final, everyday poses, more peaceful than dramatic. On the right, the stone faces of Angkor Wat, smiling that eternal, slightly cryptic, "Everything is fine" smile. And you walk slowly through this exhibit. Your footsteps echo. Your mind drifts. You realize that thousands of years of human effort all eventually lead to the same final setting. Quiet beauty. Lost cities aren't warnings. They're lullabies. Why we keep looking for lost cities anyway? People love lost cities because they hold one thing modern life rarely gives us: stillness. Today everything moves. Screens flash. Messages beep. People rush like they're racing against a clock that won't even tell them the prize. But ruins don't move. They wait. Patiently. They wait for light to fall on them. For visitors to wander in. For wind to run its fingers over carved stone. For the world to slow down enough to notice them again. And in a way that's comforting. Because if time can be gentle to them, maybe it will be gentle to us too. A final thought before we drift off tonight. As we close this long journey through Mohenjo Daro, Pompeii, and Angkor, keep this in mind. Every lost city was once a living city. Every ruin was once someone's home. Every cracked stone was once a perfect wall built by people who probably complained about the weather while doing it. And yet, they endure quietly. Not as warnings of doom, but as reminders that everything humans create eventually becomes part of the landscape. And somehow that's peaceful. So let's end softly. Imagine the empty streets of Mohenjo Daro under a warm dusk. Imagine the sun rising over the roofs of silent Pompeii. Imagine the forest light slipping through the towers of Angkor Wat, painting the stones gold. 3 cities, 3 stories, one long breath of history, slowly exhaled into the night. Night returned like a whisper, soft and silver, as you followed a narrow stone path curling upward along a windswept ridge. There were no signs, no markers, no explanations. Only a faint ribbon of footsteps leading you toward a lone structure silhouetted against the stars. It didn't look ancient, and it didn't look modern. The observatory at the edge of the world existed somewhere between both. The walls were polished black stone, so smooth they reflected moonlight like still water. A single circular door waited at the front, massive, silent, and carved with constellations you didn't recognize. You placed your hand on one of the star carvings, pulsed, just once, softly, like a heartbeat. Then the door rolled open. Inside, the air was cool and smelled faintly of rain on metal. A domed ceiling arched overhead, transparent as glass, revealing a sky so full of stars it looked unreal, as though someone had painted the heavens with too many lights. At the center of the observatory stood an enormous device. Not a telescope. Not quite. It was a spiraling lattice of gold rings, crystal spheres, and floating fragments of or that drifted lazily, suspended in air by an unseen force. The rings moved in slow, hypnotic rotations, turning with the soft hum of a sleeping machine dreaming of the cosmos. As you stepped closer, one of the crystal spheres glowed. Just faintly. Just for you. You reached out. Your fingertips brushed the surface. And the stars above you shifted. Not the ones painted on the dome. The real stars. They slid across the sky like beads on a string, rearranging themselves into new constellations, patterns so old no living astronomer had ever recorded them. It felt less like the machine was showing you the sky, and more like the sky itself was responding to your movements. You turned the glowing sphere. Slowly, gently. A ring of golden light rose from the floor and circled you. Then another. And another. Each one passed softly across your body, causing the air to shimmer like heat haze. The observatory was scanning you, measuring something, recognizing something. A panel in the floor opened, revealing a staircase spiraling downward into soft indigo light. You hesitated, only for a moment. Then you descended. The steps led into a chamber that felt impossibly large, as if stretched by space itself. On every wall, countless star maps shimmered, millions of them, shifting in slow loops like living murals. At the center of the room waited a small stone pedestal. On it lay a single object, a map made of light. Not paper, not parchment, just pure, floating, shimmering lines. It pulsed softly when you picked it up, warmth spreading through your hands up into your arms, like it was welcoming you, like it had been waiting for you. The map began to draw itself in mid-air, forming a constellation trail that pointed not to the sky, but to somewhere on Earth, somewhere hidden, somewhere forgotten, somewhere calling you. You looked up, and the observatory's ceiling vanished completely, leaving nothing between you and the vast eternal night. The stars above flickered, once, like they were winking at you. Then the map brightened, humming with an almost musical tone, ready to guide you to whatever came next. And you realized, your journey wasn't concluding. It was only now beginning. The map of light floated gently above your hands, glowing with a soft amber warmth that felt almost alive. As you turned it, the lines rearranged themselves, constellations folding inward, pathways bending, the map breathing in slow, steady pulses. A single thread of light extended outward like a pointing finger, not upward into the sky, not deeper into the observatory, but toward the mountains beyond the ridge. When you stepped back toward the observatory's entrance, the circular door rolled open on its own, as if it already knew your next destination. The night outside greeted you with a quiet wind, cold but gentle, brushing past like an invitation. The horizon was washed in moonlight, silver, endless, and then you saw it. Far away, barely visible, only when the map's light intensified, a thin beacon shimmered in the mountains. Not a flame, not a star. Something stranger, like a single thread of sunlight trapped inside stone. The light map vibrated softly. Direction. Calling. You began walking. The path through the mountains. The trail was narrow, winding between jagged cliffs that loomed like sleeping titans. Your footsteps echoed with a hollow rhythm, softened by the thin layer of frost that crackled beneath your boots. The air grew colder with each step, but the map warmed your hands, as though protecting you from the chill. Occasionally, the glowing lines shifted, subtle, graceful movements guiding you left, then right, then upward along a steep incline. It never felt abrupt. The map moved gently, patiently leading you like a friend who had walked this path countless times before. Above, the stars were impossibly bright. For a moment it felt like they were following you. Then, somewhere in the distance, came a low, resonant hum. It wasn't wind. It wasn't stone shifting. It was musical, steady, like a deep note vibrating through the bones of the earth. The map pulsed in response, as if recognizing the sound. You followed the hum. The hidden valley. The narrow mountain path ended suddenly at the edge of a ridge, opening into a vast valley hidden entirely from the outside world. A wide plain of frost-covered grass stretched below, glistening in the moonlight. At the valley's center rose a single structure. A tower taller than anything you had seen before. Narrow, spiraling, carved from pale stone that shimmered like frozen starlight. At the tower's peak burned the same beacon you had seen from afar. A slender, glowing thread of golden light. The hum grew louder as you descended into the valley. Still gentle, still musical, but vibrating through the ground like a heartbeat made of sound. The light map brightened with every step you took toward the tower. Near the entrance, something unusual happened. The glowing thread atop the tower flickered, once, almost like a blink. Then the map in your hands answered, reshaping itself into a new pattern of swirling lines and concentric shapes. The tower door opened. Not with force. Not with sound. It simply parted like a curtain made from shadow. A warm amber glow spilled out, and the hum deepened, inviting you inside. You stepped forward. The light map pulsed, stronger than ever, ready for whatever waited in the heart of the tower. The moment you stepped into the tower, the temperature changed. It wasn't warmer or colder. Just different, like the air inside had been waiting untouched for a very, very long time. The amber glow came from the walls themselves. Smooth stone that seemed to hold light the way skin holds warmth. There were no torches, no lamps, no crystals. The illumination simply existed. Quietly, peacefully. A spiraling ramp curved upward along the tower's inner wall. No stairs. Just a continuous, gentle slope. Felt intentional, designed for slow movement. Maybe even reflection. The humming sound vibrated faintly beneath your feet as you began the ascent, the tone shifting with each step. Not louder, just subtly deeper, like the tower was breathing in long, steady intervals. The light map floated from your hand on its own. Not drifting away. Just lifting a few inches above your palm, glowing brighter as if the tower had awakened something inside it. You followed it up the spiral. The walls of memory. Halfway up, you began to notice something unusual on the walls. Not carvings. Not paintings. More like impressions. Faint, swirling shapes pressed into the glowing stone. They weren't images you could clearly identify. Not people. Not writing. Not any symbol you recognized. Instead, the shapes resembled ripples, as if the stone remembered sound. Every place where a ripple formed, the wall shimmered faintly, like catching the edge of a dream you almost remembered but never quite grasped. The hum shifted again. The ripples responded, vibrating softly before settling back into stillness. It felt like the tower was listening to itself. Or maybe listening to you. You placed your hand on one of the impressions. It was warm, almost pulsing. The moment your fingers brushed the glowing ripple, another light brushed across the map. Line. Thin. Elegant. Leading upward. You continued. The tower's heart. The spiral walkway eventually ended at a circular chamber near the tower's top. The humming sound resonated strongest here, deep and soothing, the kind of vibration that made your bones feel lighter, as though your body and the air were made of the same quiet material. In the center of the chamber sat a pedestal of smooth stone. Above it floated a sphere of light. Not solid, not liquid, something in between. It drifted slowly in place, rotating with the gentlest motion, like a planet turning on its axis. Swirls of gold and pale blue shimmered across its surface, moving in slow spirals. The light map flew gently out of your hands. No urgency, no force. It simply joined the sphere, merging into it like a droplet absorbed into water. For a moment the sphere dimmed. Then it brightened, pulse by pulse, until the entire room filled with a warm, soothing radiance that made your eyes relax, made your breathing slow, made your mind clear in a way you didn't know could even happen. When the light settled, the sphere stabilized again, smaller now but more defined. Inside it, faint lines appeared, geometric, graceful, crossing and weaving like constellations connected by invisible logic. The sphere drifted toward you, hovering just above chest height. Then a voice, soft, genderless, barely above a whisper, spoke inside your mind. Not in words you understood. Not in sentences. More like impressions translated into thought. The sphere hovered inches from your hands, rotating with the slow patience of a lantern drifting on still water. Its soft hum blended with the tower's deeper vibration until both sounds were almost indistinguishable. One long, quiet exhale in the dark. You didn't have to touch it. The sphere touched you. A thin thread of light extended outward, brushing the center of your chest like a warm fingertip. The moment it did, the room around you dissolved, not suddenly, not sharply, just melted away like mist being pulled apart by sunlight. You remained standing. But the tower was gone. The memory takes shape. A soft, diffused glow replaced the chamber walls. It wasn't a landscape or a room or anything with form. It was simply light, pale, gentle, shifting in slow waves like silk floating underwater. Then shapes began to coalesce. At first only outlines, like someone drawing reality in the air with faint beams. Horizon. Then a scattering of stone platforms. Then figures, blurry at first as if carved from haze. They were people. Graceful. Moving with a quiet coordination as if following music you couldn't hear. No faces. No details, just silhouettes filled with light. You weren't inside their world. You were standing beside the memory, like watching a reflection in glass. The sphere's voice murmured in your thoughts, not loud, not literal, just the shape of meaning. Before the fall, before the quiet, the figures gathered around a platform. On it lay an object shaped like a seed. Smooth, obsidian dark, faint veins of gold drifting across its surface. They treated it with reverence, not worship, something gentler, as if it were an idea that had taken physical form. Their hands hovered above it, not touching, just surrounding it with synchronized motion. The seed responded with a soft glow. Pulse. Then another, growing brighter, brighter, but never harsh, just expanding, warming, becoming. And with each pulse, the memory space brightened until the silhouettes dissolved into the same gentle radiance that had first greeted you. You waited. You breathed. You watched. The sphere whispered again. What lived before lingers still. The light rippled outward, low, up, weightless. Then the scene faded completely. You returned to the tower. The memory dissolved into amber haze, then reshaped itself into the familiar round chamber of the tower. The hum returned. The air settled. The stone walls glowed their warm, living glow once more. The sphere hovered where it had been, quiet, steady, unchanged. But you felt something new inside it, a calm gravity, as though the memory had been a door and the sphere still stood on the threshold. It drifted slightly away from your chest, the thread of light retracting. Then it hovered, waiting, not demanding, not urging, just offering. You sensed the next moment was yours to choose. The sphere drifted closer again, not touching, not pressing, just hovering in that patient way it had, like a candle flame waiting to be noticed. The soft hum deepened, smoothing into a tone that felt warm in the chest, like the distant echo of a lullaby. Then, so gently you barely recognized it as a separate sound, the sphere's voice formed again. This time the impressions were clearer. Not words exactly, but meaning shaped into something you could rest your mind against. You saw a fragment, beginning. But beginnings are not ours alone. The sphere glowed faintly brighter. Its surface rippled like warm water touched by a breeze. More impressions flowed into your mind. A feeling of continuity. A sense that time was less like a line and more like a tide. Something that rises, rests, and returns. The sphere rotated slowly, lines of soft blue moving like constellations across its surface. You felt no urgency, no pressure, just the sphere sharing itself. Calmly, the way an elder might tell a story at the end of a long, peaceful day. Understanding without language. The next impression unfurled like a breath of warm air. What was built lasted until the silence. The silence was not an ending, only a pause. You let the meaning settle, like hearing a memory you didn't know you had. The sphere's glow dimmed to a golden dusk hue, soft and steady. Then another impression. The seed you saw. It was not power. It was guidance. Images fluttered, barely their silhouettes of hands over the dark seed, the synchronized motion, the rising glow. Not new images, just echoes of the memory you'd already witnessed. They shaped the path, not for control, for clarity. The tower around you hummed in a deeper resonance, the stones reacting gently to the sphere's presence. The ripples on the walls shimmered in faint, patient patterns, like they were remembering something too. The sphere shifted closer, as if asking a question, wordless, quiet, but unmistakable. Will you continue the path? It wasn't a command. It wasn't destiny. It was an invitation. A soft, warm doorway held open by something ancient and kind. You felt the weight of the moment settle lightly on your shoulders. Not heavy, not burdening, just a sense of stepping toward something that had waited a long time. The sphere drifted back slightly, giving you space. Still glowing, still patient, still waiting for your answer. You didn't need to say anything. Not aloud, not even in thought. You simply breathed, and let the breath settle. The sphere felt the answer. It brightened, not suddenly, not dramatically, just a slow, gentle increase in light, like dawn gathering behind a distant hill. The hum softened into a calmer vibration, settling into a tone that felt almost like a heartbeat synced with your own. The sphere drifted forward and hovered just above your open hands. Not touching, not merging, just resting in your space, acknowledging your choice with simple presence. A quiet impression flowed into your mind. Then we continue. Nothing more, nothing less. The soft unfolding. The chamber around you shifted. Not physically. No walls moved, no floors trembled, but the light changed. The warm amber glow deepened into a soft gold, spreading outward in slow waves that illuminated new patterns on the stone. The ripples along the walls shimmered, one by one, as though waking from a long, gentle sleep. Each ripple pulsed in harmony with the sphere, creating a faint pattern, almost music, but quieter, more like the idea of music. The sphere rotated, revealing a new formation of lines across its surface. Circle. Interwoven threads. 3 points of faint light connected by soft arcs. Not a map. Not quite. More like a structure. A pattern that guided rather than directed. The impression followed. 3 paths. All feed one center. You watched the threads of light shifting. No urgency. No demand. Just an invitation to see what already existed. The sphere drifted higher and projected a single beam of soft light onto the floor. The stones responded. Golden lines emerged beneath your feet, thin and delicate at first, then slowly growing brighter. They formed a circular symbol on the ground, echoing the pattern displayed on the sphere. 3 paths, 1 center. The hum deepened again, warm and steady. Your steps will shape what follows. The first path awakens. The circle at your feet glowed brighter at one point along its edge. Just one, while the others remained dormant, quiet, waiting. That glowing point extended a single line outward, stretching toward the chamber wall. As it touched the stone, the wall responded. A soft indentation appeared, gently sinking inward like clay pressed by an invisible thumb. Then it opened. Not a door. Not a tunnel. More like a veil of light parting to reveal a soft blue passage that hadn't existed moments before. You didn't feel compelled to enter, just aware that it was there. Calm, open, patient. The sphere hovered at your side, rotating slowly. An impression touched your mind again. You chose to continue. Now choose where the continuation begins. The light map, now fused within the sphere, pulsed quietly, the threads within it turning in graceful spirals. You stood at the edge of the glowing path. Your choice waited. Not heavy, not final, just present, warm, simple, open. The blue-lit passage waited with the patience of something that had existed long before you were born, and would continue long after you were gone. You took a single step toward it, and the glow beneath your foot warmed slightly, like the path acknowledging your presence. The moment you crossed the threshold, the chamber behind you didn't close. It simply faded, becoming a soft blur of warm gold, as if wrapped in a thin layer of mist. The sphere hovered beside you, floating at shoulder height. Its light dimmed to a quiet, steady pulse, companionship rather than guidance. You felt its presence like a lantern you didn't have to carry. The passage itself curved gently without corners, the walls smooth and rounded, emitting a pale blue radiance that felt neither artificial nor natural, more like an echo from long ago. Your footsteps made almost no sound. The hum from the tower softened but never disappeared. It followed you like a whisper woven into the air. Corridor that breathes. As you walked, the patterns on the walls began to shift. Not dramatically, just faint ripples moving outward in slow waves, as though the tower were breathing around you. With each ripple, the air vibrated lightly. Not enough to stir your clothing, just enough to feel like the space acknowledged your presence. The sphere beside you rotated once. An impression reached you. The first path remembers motion. You didn't know what that meant. But the meaning didn't feel urgent. It settled lightly, like a leaf landing on water. The corridor widened. Not into a room, just a broader stretch of the same gentle blue glow, giving your body more space, allowing your breath to soften naturally into longer, slower rhythms. This felt like a place meant for walking, not traveling, not exploring, just walking, letting the mind drift, letting the body settle, letting the space open. The moving walls, after some distance, measured not in steps but in breath, the walls began to shift more noticeably. The ripples now formed faint shapes, curving lines, loops, soft spirals. Their motion was slow enough to be soothing, hypnotic even, and you felt your thoughts quiet in response. The shapes didn't illustrate anything recognizable. They were just motion, gentle, flowing, unhurried. The sphere pulsed once. They moved like this, always with intention, never with haste. You sensed it wasn't referring to itself, or the tower, but to the figures you'd seen in the memory, the quiet silhouettes moving their hands over the seed, synchronized in slow arcs. Another ripple passed along the wall, its shape mirroring those same motions. For a moment, you felt as if you were walking through the residue of their presence, preserved not in images or recordings but in the memory of movement. You continued forward. The sphere drifted closer, as if sharing the quiet recognition. The room of soft motion. The passage opened into a circular chamber, larger than the one above, simpler, much quieter. Here, the blue light deepened into a soft oceanic hue, calming and full. The floor glowed in concentric rings that pulsed slowly, almost imperceptibly, like a tide rising and falling in the stillness. The walls no longer rippled outward. Instead, they flowed upward in long vertical motions, like soft strokes of light being drawn endlessly toward a ceiling you couldn't see. The sphere floated into the center of the room and dimmed itself further. This is where the first memories settled. Not thoughts, not knowledge, only motion. You walked to the room's center. The floor warmed slightly beneath your feet. And without warning, not a shift, not a sound, the room began to move with you. Every step you took caused the patterns on the floor to glide outward in gentle waves. Every breath caused the walls to shift in faint vertical pulses. It wasn't responding in real time. It was echoing, reflecting, mirroring, like the room was a lake and you were the pebble. The sphere hovered quietly. This path teaches nothing. It only shows. You took another slow step. The floor rippled outward in another soft wave. The walls breathed in a long rising motion. You felt no expectation, no message, just presence, just motion, just quiet. You remained in the center of the chamber, watching the soft ripples spread outward from your steps. Even when you stood perfectly still, the floor continued its slow, gentle breathing, rising and falling in concentric waves like a heart that refused to hurry. The sphere floated quietly beside you, hovering in the air like an attentive lantern. For a long moment nothing happened. Nothing changed. Just the quiet hum, the rhythmic pulse of light, and your own calm breath syncing with the room around you. Then the sphere brightened slightly, not in a flash, but in a slow, warm bloom. An impression drifted into your mind. Motion was their language. The chamber responded to the thought, the walls rising in a slightly fuller arc, then settling again. Another impression followed. They spoke through patterns and listened through stillness. You glanced at the walls. The vertical waves continued to glide upward in long, soothing strokes. The sphere rotated, threads of gold weaving across its surface as it communicated without words. To them, a gesture held the weight of a sentence. The chamber echoed this idea, subtle lines shifting to mimic the arcs of hands you saw in the earlier memory. The curves were so soft you almost missed them. A movement repeated was a promise. A movement changed was a question. You watched one of the spirals on the far wall loosen slightly, its curve widening as if to demonstrate. No rush. Just a calm, clear invitation to notice. The sphere dimmed again. And when motion stopped, they listened. The room responded instantly. The upward waves paused. The floor's concentric rings softened into stillness. Even the faint hum seemed to thin out until only a whisper remained. All because you were standing still. You weren't being tested. You weren't being taught. You were simply being shown how this place remembered communication. A memory hidden in movement. The sphere moved a little closer, as if gently guiding your attention to one section of the chamber wall. There, among the faint rippling patterns, a new motion appeared, one you hadn't seen before. It unfolded slowly. Curve. Loop. A single downward arc like a hand sweeping in a thoughtful gesture. The sphere spoke again. This was the last motion they left behind. The gesture repeated itself. Slow, almost mournful, but not sad, just resigned. Accepting. They did not leave in fear. They left with intention. The wall pulsed softly. The gesture repeated one last time. And they hoped someone would see it. Not decipher it. Not translate it. Just see it. And you had. Why you were brought to this path. The sphere drifted back slightly, giving you space again. Its glow steadied into a soft halo. The first path shows how they began. How they shaped meaning without rushing. The chamber resumed its subtle motion. Floor rippling, walls rising gently upward. You felt the meaning of the sphere's impressions settling into place, like soft sand smoothing under a tide. This path wasn't about learning a skill. It was about remembering a pace. Pace where motion was deliberate. Where silence was part of communication. Where nothing needed to be fast to be meaningful. The sphere floated to your side again. You sensed the path wasn't finished. But the revelation was. Now the room simply waited. Still, calm, open. And the sphere's final impression in this moment whispered through your thoughts. When you are ready, the next motion will appear. You remained in the center of the chamber, letting the soft ripples of light and motion settle around you. The sphere hovered patiently, faintly pulsing in gentle acknowledgement of your calm presence. After a few quiet breaths, a subtle change began. Not sudden, not startling. Just a slight shift in the chamber's rhythm, almost like a whispered suggestion. One of the concentric rings on the floor glowed a little brighter. It extended a thin, delicate line toward a wall. There, the vertical waves responded. They paused for a fraction longer, then shifted slightly to form a single, clear arc. Motion. Subtle. Fluid. Almost like the gesture of someone reaching out. Not to touch, not to hold, but simply to indicate. The sphere's voice arrived. Not loud, not intrusive, just a quiet impression that floated directly into your awareness. The next gesture is yours to witness. Notice it. Do not act yet. You stepped closer, drawn by the soft, shimmering line that now seemed alive on the wall. It traced a smooth downward arc, then looped inward like a slow spiral. Watching it, you realized it mirrored the movements of the figures from the memory you had seen earlier. The hands over the seed, the synchronized arcs, the gentle, deliberate patterns. This was not instruction, not command, just emotion preserved. A gesture held in the space like a thought frozen in amber. The chamber responded to your attention. The ripples across the walls and floor deepened subtly, moving in tandem with the arc. It was as if the room itself were breathing along with the gesture, expanding slightly then contracting back, slowly and rhythmically. The sphere pulsed gently at your side. Observe fully. Feel the arc. Its intention is not in movement, but in presence. You did. You watched. You felt. The gesture wasn't trying to tell you anything. It didn't need to. The room, the sphere, the motion itself. Everything existed simply in quiet understanding. After a few slow moments, the spiral of motion continued, forming a gentle wave that expanded across the wall. The floor responded in concentric echoes, each ripple slow, deliberate, and calming. And then the subtle suggestion arrived. When ready, you may create your own. Not a requirement, not a test, just an invitation. To contribute a gesture. To participate in the slow, deliberate conversation preserved in this chamber for untold generations. The sphere hovered closer, light soft and steady, encouraging but patient. You sensed that there was no wrong way to move, no error to make. The chamber simply awaited your presence and your choice. The walls pulsed gently once more, then stilled. The floor rippled faintly beneath your feet. Hush fell. Quiet, soft, expectant. Your next motion was yours to decide. You inhaled slowly. Not hurriedly. Not with urgency. Just a calm, deliberate breath, letting the chamber settle further around you. The sphere hovered nearby, glowing faintly, threads of golden light tracing delicate patterns along its surface. Its pulse seemed to echo the rhythm of your heartbeat, soft and steady. The walls waited. The floor waited. The room, in all its quiet, luminous patience, waited. You lifted your hand. No thought. No intention beyond the gentle awareness of presence. Just a slow, sweeping arc through the air. Your movement was mirrored faintly by the chamber itself. The walls rippled, the floor shimmered, and the concentric circles on the ground expanded outward like waves across a still pond. The sphere pulsed brighter in response, but not abruptly. Just a soft acknowledgement of your gesture, like a nod. Then another movement. A gentle loop, fluid, soft. You imagined the motion as a ripple traveling not just through the room, but through the memory of the figures you had seen before. Each motion was an echo, a continuation, a quiet contribution to the chamber's ongoing rhythm. The chamber responded. The arc of your gesture blended with the wall's vertical waves, the floor's concentric ripples, and the floating threads of light across the sphere. The effect wasn't dramatic. It wasn't meant to be. But it was there. A subtle conversation between presence and space, between movement and memory. The sphere's impression reached your mind again. You participate now. Not to change. Not to command. Only to continue. Your motions became slower, more intentional. A small circle, barely noticeable. A sweeping line that curved gently. The chamber's echoes matched your rhythm, extending outward in soft pulses that seemed to linger in the air for moments longer than possible, like time itself had softened. And then something new occurred. A faint glow appeared along the edges of the concentric rings on the floor, lines you had not noticed before, connecting points you had not touched. The room subtly shifted its motion to acknowledge them, integrating them with the rhythm of your gestures. You stop. Breathe. The motion lingered. Not vanished. Not paused. But integrated into the quiet, slow heartbeat of the chamber. Your presence had left a trace, a gentle mark, a soft echo that would remain even after you moved on. The sphere hovered just above your hand, a warm presence, a companion. Its voice was faint, like a distant wind brushing through the chamber. Every gesture matters, not for the eye, but for the memory it leaves. The air was calm. The light was soft. Your movements had become part of something much older, much slower, and infinitely patient. And somewhere in the quiet hum, a faint ripple suggested that the chamber was ready to reveal more. Another gesture. Another path. Another thread waiting quietly in the weave of light. The choice was yours. You stood quietly in the center of the chamber, feeling the soft pulse of your previous gestures ripple outward, blending with the gentle hum of the space. The sphere hovered beside you, threads of golden light drifting lazily across its surface, glowing steadily without urgency. Then, almost imperceptibly at first, a faint shimmer appeared along the far edge of the chamber. A subtle glow traced a line on the floor, leading from the outer ring toward a point just beyond the wall's gentle vertical waves. The motion was soft, almost hesitant, like a thought beginning to form in the mind. Your gaze followed it, and you realized a second path had begun to reveal itself. It wasn't a door, not a tunnel, not a staircase. It was simply light, quiet suggestion, a delicate invitation stretching across the chamber's floor. The sphere drifted slightly closer, its gentle pulse echoing the rhythm of the new line. An impression reached your mind. Another path awaits. Observe before stepping. Learn its rhythm. You bent slightly, letting your hand hover above the shimmering line. The floor beneath responded to your presence, faint ripples radiating outward. The walls seemed to lean inward very slightly, the vertical waves shifting to mirror the path's shape. It was not insistence, not pressure, just a patient acknowledgement. Slowly, deliberately, you traced a finger along the line of light. The floor pulsed faintly beneath your touch. The ripples of your gesture extended outward, intersecting with your previous movements. For a moment, the chamber felt as if it was breathing, not in air, but in motion itself. The sphere's impression continued. Every path connects. Every gesture resonates. Observe, and the next motion will appear. The shimmer along the floor deepened into a faint arc of pale blue light, rising slightly like a gentle wave. The vertical ripples along the walls shifted in response, forming soft spirals that mirrored the shape of the glowing path. It was mesmerizing, hypnotic but calm. You didn't rush. You didn't need to. The chamber was patient. The sphere was patient. You simply breathed and let your attention follow the soft, deliberate rhythm of the second path. And then, in the subtle pulse of the chamber, you noticed it. Another gesture emerging. A faint shape forming in the ripples of light. Something waiting quietly for you to interact. The impression came, almost like a whisper of thought. When ready, move along the path. The next gesture will guide your motion. The second path was not demanding. It was merely present, waiting, calmly, patiently. You felt the choice settle softly in your chest. To follow the path, to engage with the next gesture, or simply to observe and let the chamber's rhythms unfold around you. And for the first time, the sense of time seemed entirely suspended. There was only the slow, deliberate glow of the chamber, the soft pulse of the sphere, and the gentle invitation of the second path. Quiet, patient moment.